Welcome to the Gary DeMar blogcast. This audio is brought to you by Canon Press.
Welcome to the Gary DeMar blogcast. The topic of today's entry covers part one of a multi-part discussion of the Bible, the Constitution, and the jurisdictional separation of church and state. I was listening to an interview with Ken Starr on his new book, Religious Liberty in Crisis: Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty. I have not read the book, but I did agree with Starr's assessment that most Americans lack a basic knowledge of the First Amendment. Most likely, Mr. Starr does not deal with the First Amendment and how it relates to civil government in terms of biblical law. To supplement Starr's book and that of many other similar attempts to understand the biblical approach to church-state relationships, I've put together a short series titled The Constitution and the Jurisdictional Separation of Church and State. For a more comprehensive study of this topic, I suggest my books God and Government and Restoring the Foundation of Civilization, available at AmericanVision.org. If you would like a transcript of the series, send an email to support@AmericanVision.org. There's a great deal of confusion since the phrase separation of church and state is used as a substitute for the actual words of the First Amendment. The words separation, church, and state do not appear in the Constitution. Also, many people, Christians included, believe the Bible merged church and state. This is not the case either. The Bible describes a jurisdictional separation of church and state. That does not mean separating God from civil government. As we will see, our nation's founding documents agree with this assessment. According to a survey, while only 1 in 4 Americans can name more than one of the 5 freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment, freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances, more than half can name at least 2 members of the Simpsons cartoon family. The study of the new McCormick Tribune Freedom Museum found that 22% of Americans could name all 5 Simpson family members, compared with just 1 in 1,000 people who could name all 5 First Amendment freedoms. The survey found more people could name the 3 American Idol judges than identify 3 First Amendment rights. They were also more likely to remember popular advertising slogans. It also showed that people misidentified First Amendment rights. About 1 in 5 people thought the right to own a pet was protected, and 38% said they believed the right against self-incrimination contained in the Fifth Amendment was a First Amendment right. So what are the 5 freedoms found in the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. First freedom. Abridging the freedom of speech. Second freedom. Of the press. Third freedom. The right of the people to assemble in a peaceful manner, the 4th freedom, and the 5th freedom, to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It's important at this point that we understand the nature of jurisdictions. The Constitution is a document of specified boundaries. It establishes the powers of the national government by enumerating them, that is, specifying just exactly what those powers are and no others. Only those powers specified in the Constitution belong to the national government. The Constitution is similar to a fenced piece of property. The owner of the property only has rights specified in the survey and deed related to the property. A person who owns a piece of property has legitimate jurisdiction over it, but he does not have jurisdiction over someone else's property. A property owner can only speak the law, jurisdiction, within the boundary lines of his own property. In this way, a property owner's jurisdiction is legally limited. He cannot encroach on the property of others because his jurisdiction does not extend beyond what he owns. Permission must be secured from the original property owner to use his property. To use someone else's property without the owner's permission is a violation of the 8th commandment. You shall not steal, Exodus 20, verse 15. Elsewhere we read, cursed is he who moves his neighbor's boundary mark, Deuteronomy 27:17. It's no more legitimate when civil officials do it, 1 Kings chapter 21, Hosea chapter 5, verse 10. The concept of jurisdictional boundaries and limitations is not new to our time. God established property and moral boundaries when he instructed Adam and Eve not to eat fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Genesis chapter 2. From beginning to end, the law code is a code of boundary limitations. The law tells us what is permissible and what is not as it applies to individuals in self-government, parents and children in family governments, elders, deacons, and members in church governments, and citizens and elected officials and their agents in civil governments and every other area of life. What's true of individuals and their relationship to the law is especially true of civil governments, since the state has the power of the sword, Romans 13:4. That is, it can enforce its jurisdictional boundaries by literally putting people to death in violation of certain capital crimes. It can also send your children off to war and take money from you at the point of a sword, in terms of today, at the point of a gun. Does the fact that the state has the sword lessen the legitimate restrictions on personal and property rights? Possession of deadly force does not overturn legitimate jurisdictional rights. If the boundary markers of civil government are not expressly set forth, then it's possible and likely that the civil sphere of government will be used to trample the boundary markers, that is, the jurisdictions of individuals, families, churches, businesses, lesser magistrates, like states, county governments, and city governments, and nations for personal and national aggrandizement. That is, to use the power of the state to make money for itself and to give it more and more power over time. The story of Ahab and his desire to get Naboth's vineyard by hook or by crook is an obvious example in 1 Kings 21. Our founders understood these principles. That's why the form of civil government they developed was decentralized and specifically designed to limit political power. As Thomas Jefferson stated in the Kentucky Resolutions of 1789, in questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Russell Kirk confirms Jefferson's sentiment. He writes, "The constitutions of the American Commonwealth are intended and have successfully operated to restrain political power, to prevent any person or clique or party from dominating permanently the government of the country. It is one of the greatest premises of American political theory that all just authority comes from the people under God, not from a monarch or a governing class, but from the innumerable individuals who make up the public. The people delegate to government only so much power as they think is prudent for government to exercise. They reserve to themselves all the powers and rights that are not expressly granted to the federal or state or local governments. Government is the creation of the people, not their master. Thus, the American political system, first of all, is a system of limited delegated powers, entrusted to political officers and representatives and leaders for certain well-defined public purposes. Only through the recognition of this theory of popular sovereignty, and only through this explicit delegation of powers, the founders of the American Republic believed, could the American nation keep clear of tyranny or anarchy. The theory and the system have succeeded. America never has endured a dictator or tolerated violent social disorder." This is the end of Kirk's quotation. As we're beginning to see, because more and more power has been given to the federal government, we are seeing elements of a dictatorship where presidents of the United States can just sign into law, go around Congress and go around the Constitution and declare something to be the new law. We're also seeing in the streets of many cities in the United States violent disorder in order to disrupt the political system that we have, in order to make the federal government even more powerful than it is. State governments and their courts have jurisdictional authority to speak the law to those who reside within the boundaries of their respective states. Their jurisdictional freedom is no different from that of the federal government. That's why each state has its own constitution, courts, and elected officials. An elected official in one state has no jurisdictional authority in or over another state. In the same way, the federal government's jurisdiction is limited by the Constitution, although such limitations are not always acknowledged by the courts, the president, or Congress. These delegated agencies often test the limits of their specified boundary markers. Voters will often use the power of civil government to overstep its constitutionally set jurisdictional limits when they want to use the power of the state for a particular benefit to them. They will elect representatives and senators who will bring home the bacon to their congressional district and state at the expense of other states. Where are the federal dollars coming from to pay for these projects? They are collected from individuals from throughout the United States in the form of taxes and fees, sent to Washington, and then redistributed back to the states. This type of political dealing violates the jurisdictional limitations outlined in the Constitution. Powers not specified, that is, not enumerated in the Constitution, are retained by the individual states or the people generally. These federal jurisdictional limitations are described in the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution. The 9th Amendment states, "The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people." The 10th Amendment, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people." What's true of the taxing power of civil government and its jurisdictional limitations is equally true of civil government's relationship with religion, including church government and its courts, preaching, and the administration of the sacraments. While many people believe the Bible merges church and state, the opposite is actually the case. As we will see in Part 2, the Bible extends jurisdictional and boundary limitations to church and state without ever suggesting that the church and state have different sources of authority for their spheres.
Thank you for listening to the Gary DeMar blogcast. For more from Gary and American Vision, check out the American Vision collection in the Canon app.